good, then 2's probably a lot better, right? So I ran 2. And then if 2's good, well, 4's better. And so it went on and on and on and on. So anyway, I started doing these really long races. And I use the word race loosely because it's hard to call what I do in these long things racing. I always say I'm in the bottom half, which is really, really important because we give the top half the ability to exist. So, I'm running this race, and this race is out in Maryland, and it's a 50-mile race, and on these races, you're going through and you're running through the woods for a long time, and ever so often they have aid stations, and this is really a spot where you can fill up your water pack, you can get food, snacks, things like that. And anyway, we're coming up to this aid station after about 30 miles, and I was a little bored at this point. I was running through the woods forever, and I was a little bored, and I saw people, and I thought, oh, yay, I get to have fun. So I thought, I'm going to play a little joke on them. So I ran up to these people, and I was like, how far is this race? Like that. And the lady who was with her husband, I thought, and she looked at her husband, and she said, she looked at me, and she goes, sir, this race is 50 miles. And I went, are you kidding me? and then I continued on. But that's often what the Christian life seems like, isn't it? Like we're running along and it's like, how far is this race? My goodness. Like in 2007, some people have had a bad year. And it's like, how far does this go? When am I going to get there? When can I relax? When is it going to stop and I can finally just rest, right? Well, we need to realize in the passage, it's a lifelong race. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And the reward for running the race is the joy that's set before us. Okay, so we know how long the race is. It's a lifelong race. So what's the map? How do we get there? So if we refer back to the passage, we see it starts off with cloud of witnesses. It says in verse 12, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, and another translation for the word witnesses is examples. So there's a lot of examples in Hebrews 11, if you step back. And one of those examples is Moses. So in chapter 11, it says in verse 23, by faith, Moses was hidden by his parents for 3 months after his birth. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called a son of Pharaoh's daughter. It was by faith he left Egypt, and by faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood. So we see the first thing with the map is, okay, well, we got to have faith. So Moses didn't necessarily know, okay, what's going to come next. He didn't really know, okay, what's down the road for me, but he knew that when he got there, that God would tell him which direction to go. So it's by faith. So that's the first thing we need is faith. So the second thing would be, it's clear in the passage also that we're not to run it alone. It says, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that's set before us. It doesn't say, you go run your race and I'll run mine. It says, let us collectively run our race together. So I have a friend, a good friend of mine. He kind of got me into this whole thing, but anyway, he's a lot crazier than me, and he does really, really long stuff and adventure races, things like that. And part of these races is you can have what's called a pacer. And basically the pacer's job, well, the pacer's somebody that you ask to come along with you to help you out. And so you ask someone to come along or you threaten them, and he threatens me, so I go. And the pacer's job is to make sure, one, that the runner doesn't die. That's step one. Step two is you make sure that they stay on the right course. So, give you an example. We were out in Colorado this last year, and it was a 100-mile race he was running, and the elevation, most of it was over 12,000 feet. And so we're running, and I joined up with him after about 70 miles. So he's had 70 miles of exertion already. He's pretty worn out. And so I start running with him, and of course I'm fresh, right? I'm feeling good. But I don't run way ahead of him and say, hey buddy, come on, turn this way, turn that way. I stay right with him. And make sure that, okay, one, he doesn't fall off a cliff this way or go that way. Two, I make sure, okay, you're drinking water, you're going to survive this thing. Let's make sure we eat, we drink water. And that's really what we also need in our Christian life. We need pacers that come along beside us to help us stay on track as well. So how do we get there? What's the map? One, we have faith that we may not know where the next turn is, but we know that God will be there when we get there. And then two, we need accountability. So we know how far the race is. We know the map, or an idea of the map. So how do we prepare? How do we train? So if we look back to the passage, there's a couple things that it tells us. It says, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race set before us. So let us also lay aside every weight and the sin. Interesting thing about weight, studies have shown with the elite marathon runners, and you've seen these guys, they're these real skinny dudes with long legs, and they run forever. Well, studies show that if they lose 1 pound of weight, they will be able to complete a marathon, 26 miles, and lose 2 seconds for every mile that they run for every pound that they lose, which is a huge deal. I mean, these guys don't weigh very much anyway, and if they just lose 1 pound, they stay the same, they'll run 2 seconds faster every mile for 26.2 miles, which is incredible. So weight is important. And in the passage, we see kind of a distinction between weight and sin. There's weight, and then there's sin. So in some of the reading I did for this message this morning, one person described weight as a distraction or things in our life that don't necessarily serve a godly purpose. I think we have those things. I call them guilty pleasures, like video games for me, which don't tell anybody. But it is, that I spend that time playing video. I could be in the Word, couldn't I? That's a distraction. That's a weight. But it's also sin. So sins are a little more obvious. Those are things that we know, okay, man, this is obvious. I'm doing this, and it's definitely not part of God's plan. That's pretty obvious. So many times I know in my life I have prayed, hey, Father, God, I've got this weight, I've got this sin going on. If you would just remove it from me, I would run the race. And man, if you just take it from me, I would run this race so fast you wouldn't believe it. Just take it away. What we need to realize is that weight has been removed, the sin has been removed, and because Jesus ran the race set before him, we can also run the race set before us. So there was a doctor, his name was Dr. Jack Daniels, not to be confused with the other Jack Daniels. But he was a marathon runner, an elite runner. He was in the Olympics in the 1950s and 60s. And he came out with a book in 1998 that was basically a culmination of 30, 40 years worth of running and coaching. He was named by Runner's World magazine as the top running coach of all time because he revolutionized the sport. And it used to be people would train for running by running. Makes sense. But they had no formula, they had no plan. It was just, if you want to get faster, we should probably just run more. And he said, hang on, there's got to be a difference. So in his book in 1998, he came out with a formula. And his formula was all about capacity. So what it basically said was that it started with everyone starts with the same capacity, so which is 88%. So no matter who you are, no matter what age you are, what your ability level is, you have the same capacity, which is 88%. So everyone can perform at 88% of their capacity for 1 hour. That was a starting point for him. So then he decided, okay, how do we increase our capacity? So if everyone starts at the same point, then how do we make it bigger? So he had all these formulas and these plans to increase your running capacity. So let's compare that to our Christian life and our Christian walk. I think it's safe to say that we all have a certain capacity to run the race. So we all have a certain amount of ability to stay on course. We certainly have the ability to keep running, but what keeps us running and keeps us running with endurance is our spiritual capacity. So, and especially this time of year, we're looking at, okay, 2018, what disciplines am I going to do? What kind of goals do I have? What things am I going to challenge myself with? And I would really encourage you this morning, as we're all running a race, to implement things that build our spiritual capacity. People ask Dr. Daniels, okay, we've got all the formulas. You told us how to do it. What's the difference then? What allows someone really to go from here to here? And he said, I've given you the tools, but there's two things that allow people to go from there to there, and it's training and discipline. Those are the two things. So without training and discipline, they can't go from here to here. And it's like that in our spiritual life. Without training and discipline, we can't increase our spiritual capacity. So as you look forward to this year, think about some ways to incorporate training and discipline to build spiritual capacity in your life. So to recap, we know, okay, so we've learned how far the race is. We've learned the map, what the map is, which is faith and accountability. And then we know how to prepare and train, which is training and discipline and time in the Word. Amen.